Member of the state delegation and maybe the senior guy. This is my 19th year in Washington, D.C., but most importantly, as a member of the Appropriations Committee, I have seen during my years in Congress the need for a balanced budget amendment, the need for the tool that 49 states, including the state of Georgia, has that would allow members of both parties to be able to look constituents in the eye and say, you know, we just can't do it because we have to balance the budget. Now, we have that authority now, but we don't have that consensus. And those of us who try our best to hold the line on spending and pass budgets and do the right thing still need the statutory authority that will hold all of our colleagues in line. I'm very excited that we will be having another vote on it. This is a very significant vote that will take place in the fall. The last time we came close, we missed it by one vote in 1995. I hope and pray we can get it done today, because our situation, when we're borrowing 40 cents on every dollar that we spend in the national debt, is now about 100% of the GDP. America has to get its fiscal house in order just like American families do. So that's what I'm here to say, and we are unified as a delegation about. As you know, we have our great Majority Leader Eric Cantor here, and we're going to let him say a word or two, but first I wanted to pass the microphone to other members of the delegation and let them say something quickly about the balanced budget amendment.
Well, Jack, thank you very much, and I think it was very appropriate to get this press conference together about this very important issue. Congressman Kingston talked about the last time we had a vote on it in Congress in 1995, and it failing by one vote. Well, let me just remind you of a shocking statistic. Since 1995, we've increased the debt by $9 trillion. That was a consequence of failing by one vote. Anybody who thinks that members of Congress are going to balance the budget voluntarily obviously don't know those statistics. We're not going to do it. And whether it's a Republican administration, a majority, or a Democrat, we have the proof of the pudding is that we have not done that. We need to have the constraints of a balanced budget amendment, just as Jack said, the 49 states. I'm Phil Gingrich from the 11th Congressional District. I'm probably in age the senior member of this group, but I've only been in Congress for 9 years, so Jack, you got me beat by about 10 years. Let me turn the mic over to Dr. Tom Price, my colleague from North Fulton.
Thanks, Phil. Tom Price, I represent the 6th District of Georgia. Georgia families have to balance their budget. Georgia businesses have to balance their budget. Washington should have to do the same thing. We need the balanced budget now.
I'm Tom Graves from Georgia's 9th Congressional District, and this is an exciting time for the American taxpayers. Washington has run wild for far too long, and this is the one opportunity we have to get Washington within a box. And it's time to box up Washington, get it to spend within what it has as a revenue source, and not spend outside of that revenue source. So I think it's an exciting time, and I encourage all voters out there, all taxpayers, to engage your congressman, whether Republican or Democrat, and encourage them to support the balanced budget amendment coming up shortly.
I'm Austin Scott from Georgia's 8th Congressional District, and I think the one thing I will tell you about the 89 members of the freshman Republican class that is an identifying feature of our class is that we have over 300 children and grandchildren, and it's simply not fair to pass this debt and this burden down to them. One of our jobs is to protect the economic opportunities of that next generation, and we believe the balanced budget does that. One of the things I'd also ask you to keep in mind is that once we pass it in Washington, it simply sends it to the states and gives the people the opportunity to have a bigger voice in whether or not we as the elected officials in Congress have to abide by that balanced budget amendment. So the people get to speak on it again even after we pass it. Thank you.
I'm Paul Brown. I represent the 10th Congressional District here in Georgia. And I believe in a balanced budget so much that I've introduced a balanced budget amendment in 2 Congresses now. It's absolutely critical that we pass a balanced budget so that we can hold presidents of both parties as well as Congresses under the control of both parties accountable. In fact, as my colleagues have already said, Congress has refused to balance its budget. The only way we're going to get our country back in a good fiscal condition so that our children and our grandchildren have a positive future is by passing a balanced budget amendment. As Dr. Price said, it's time to pass the balanced budget now. And we're asking the American people to support us and contact their congressmen, their senators, and ask their representatives to vote to pass the balanced budget now.
I'm Glenn Westmoreland from Georgia's 3rd Congressional District, and I just want to say that having served in the Georgia House for 12 years before I was elected to Congress, I saw how a balanced budget amendment works. The budget went up to about $20 billion, and now it's down to about 16. And so people of Georgia, elected officials in Georgia, had to make do with what they had, just like our families and our businesses do. This is the first time in the 2 Congresses before us that we've been able to even bring the balanced budget amendment up for a vote. And I think that tells a lot about what the mentality of Congress is. So we're here asking everybody's support to notify your congressman to let them know that we need to vote on this balanced budget amendment. Not only vote on it, we need to pass it, send it to the states, get it ratified, and put it into our Constitution.
I'm Rob Woodall. I'm in Georgia's 7th District. I'm one of the freshmen up there in Washington. 99 new faces in Washington this year, almost a quarter of the Congress. So if there's ever an opportunity to change the way things happen in Washington, it's in this cycle. I was at a Rotary lunch today. Somebody said, Rob, who doesn't support a balanced budget amendment? The answer may be just those folks inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C., because I know folks support it back home. And as you're looking around trying to find those areas of common ground where we can move this country forward, whether you believe we're spending too much or taxing too little, the balanced budget amendment is that idea that gets us back on track. And I do hope everyone on all sides of the political spectrum, all ends of this political spectrum, will get on board and help to motivate those folks inside the Beltway to make it happen. I appreciate that.
And now it's a great honor for me to introduce on behalf of the delegation our Majority Leader Eric Cantor. Comes from the 7th District in the Commonwealth of Virginia. He was educated in Virginia, went to GW undergrad, went to William and Mary Law School, then he went to Columbia University to get a master's degree. Then he practiced in his family real estate business. So he has been on the ground, and in that capacity, he's learned what a balanced budget means. He also served in the Virginia legislature, another state that has a balanced budget. And as a member of Congress and as a majority whip and a majority leader now, he has seen up front, because of his negotiations toe-to-toe with Harry Reid and President Obama, and even with Republicans many, many times in these long late-night sessions, the need for a balanced budget. So please welcome Eric Cantor to the
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here in Atlanta and to join my colleagues in the Georgia delegation that have been stalwarts in the fight to maintain some sense of fiscal sanity and restore that to Washington. There's no question, since our new majority took hold in January, we have been all about change. We are trying to change the status quo in Washington. We're trying to change the way that that town does business. First and foremost, we want to hold ourselves accountable to the people that sent us there. And most certainly, we want to make sure that taxpayer dollars are spent prudently as if they were our own, because they don't belong to Washington, they belong to the people that earn it. And change like this does not come easy, and it takes a long time. And while we look out across this country and over 14 million Americans remain unemployed, we have to continue to focus on pro-growth policies that can get people back to work, pro-growth policies that focus on the real job creators, the small businesses of this country. But we also need to put Washington on a budget. And it is high time for us to be able to do that so that people, businesses, and the next generation can look to a much more financially secure future. Now, since President Obama came to office in January '09, our national debt has increased $3.7 trillion. Now, to put that in perspective, it took this country from 1776 in its founding until 1992 to accumulate a similar amount of debt. That's where we are right now. And as has been said before, your federal government borrows over 40 cents of every dollar it spends. We have got to get this under control because frankly, those borrowings will continue to rack up, largely by the Chinese. And who's going to pay for it? Our kids and theirs. And it's of urgent matter that we get this straight. And that's why we're here today to talk about the fact that we need a balanced budget amendment. No question, the American people understand. 95% of them, when polled, say that the budget deficit is a real problem. 65% of Americans say that a balanced budget is the way forward. And why shouldn't Washington be on a balanced budget? Why shouldn't we work our way towards that? That's the ultimate tool in affecting the kind of change that we promise the American people. Thank you.
Great. And anybody has any questions?
Jeremy Rubin with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, formerly of the Richmond Times-Dispatch.
There you go.
A question for the Majority Leader, two questions actually. One is, what are the prospects of this passing the Senate, 2/3 of the Senate? And secondly, after that, could you address the prospects of a government shutdown after this deficit deal expires, given that there are differences between the Senate and the House and Democrats and Republicans on this issue, and some Republican freshmen have disagreed with this in the past on this issue?
Well, first of all, let me try and address the balanced budget amendment. As Jack said before, the last time this vote was taken, the Senate came up 1 vote short. And I think Phil Gingrich talked about what that would have done if we would have put a balanced budget amendment in place at that point, and all the trillions of dollars in additional deficit maybe we could have avoided. It clearly, when you look at the polling in this country, it just makes sense to people. And just from a common sense notion, one has to ask, who wouldn't be for a balanced budget? That's just sound policy. That makes sense. That's why we're here, and we're here as well as our colleagues across the country talking to their constituents, insisting that they call the Senate, and they call, if they're represented by members who don't support it, to call them as well. As far as the government shutdown, as you know, we in the House abided by the debt ceiling agreement that was passed back in August and sent the Senate a continuing resolution to fund the government through November 18th. The amount of money for the year, but prorated, was that 1043 number, $1,043 billion. The sticking point happened to have been how we account for the types of trillion-dollar plus budgets that we've been racking up annually. And as we know, the East Coast of the United States has experienced a lot of disaster, as have other areas. And so at the time, the FEMA asked the administration to ask Congress for additional monies. We in the House responded. We responded with twice as much as what the administration said. Said, here's $1 billion to deal with victims who need disaster relief assistance. So we sent that bill over. The monies were there. Harry Reid decided that he didn't like the fact that those monies were there, but they were there offset by some programs that frankly have not proven effective in terms of the job creation that some claim. But we took the notion that just as we're saying here, we've got to be fiscally responsible. It's high time we start putting the money where our mouth is. If we're about trying to make sure that we balance this budget, we've got to make sure we begin setting priorities. Priority 1 is getting relief to disaster victims. We did that. And so there shouldn't be any question about that. Harry Reid then calls the administration, and I assume the administration then all of a sudden finds out that they don't need the money. So because I think that we had prevailed in terms of a common sense fiscal path, Harry Reid took away all the emergency disaster money and has now sent a measure back to the House. And we are operating in a bridge situation until next week. Obviously the Jewish holidays start this week and Congress will not be in session. And we will vote again on the continuing resolution without disaster money, funding the government through November 18th.
With Senate Democratic leadership and the President saying this balanced budget amendment is a non-starter, why spend the effort to do this, to keep this pressure on?
You know, Washington is famous for saying no. And no to some very common sense things. And going back to our commitment of changing the way the federal government does business, changing the way it spends taxpayer dollars, we are committed to ensuring that this common sense policy of a balanced budget amendment is passed.
But you know it's not going to happen.
No, the vote hasn't taken place. 2/3 of the members of both houses pass the amendment. Then it goes and is reported to the states. The president does not have, an ability to stop that.
What about the president's job plan? He's out on the road promoting it. What do you think about what you're hearing as he tours the country here?
Well, listen, the president's plan, he is going around the country right now, going to many Republican districts, and I hope that he hears what we all hear, that people don't want to see their taxes raised. He went to a bridge, I think that in between Ohio and Kentucky last week, and I think that all that does is remind the people that it was his stimulus bill that was supposed to have addressed that decaying bridge, and that in fact stimulus programs are not what we need right now. We need programs geared toward the private sector and how we make it easier for small businesses to operate and grow. And that's where our Job Creators agenda comes in, providing small business tax relief, and by creating an environment we can roll back some of the proposed regulations that are getting in the way of small business optimism and growth.
Congressman Kingston, Bill Crane with Channel 11, WSB Radio, Georgia Trend, and the champion. Our version of piling on. You're on the House Appropriations Committee. You've got an intractable set of differences, whether we're talking about the Special Committee of 12 or the other side of the aisle. Are you at all optimistic either on the Special Committee of 12 coming up with a budget to carry forward, to come up with what you want in terms of no new revenue and what they want in terms of new revenue and other things? The American people are getting a little tired of the finger pointing, and we want to see solutions, and you're on one of the primary committees that's been dealing with these issues year in and year out. Do you feel any better than you did when you got there in 1992 that this will happen?
Well, remember, historically, the founders have set it up to make it very difficult to get things done. And having been out on the road a whole lot lately, I hear from constituents, you guys aren't getting anything done, and then I hear, and I'm glad you're not. You remember the same America that elected 87 Tea Party-leaning Republicans also re-elected Harry Reid. So there is some signal on that. But I have to say, I'm optimistic. If you think about it, that Eric Cantor and John Boehner were able to work out a tax extension agreement with President Obama and Harry Reid last December, before we took the majority. We got it done. There was a lot of huffing and puffing before that happened. Then last spring we had a CR that closed out FY 2011, a lot of huffing and puffing before that took place, but Eric Cantor, John Boehner, Harry Reid, Barack Obama got it done. August 2nd, we saw the same scenario. It is not easy. We're a very divided country right now, but when push gets...
Is the country divided or is Washington divided? Are we going to be waiting on Christmas Eve to find out if we're going to have automatic cuts rolling in on defense and everything else?
I think Washington is reflective of the country. And, one of the favorite table topics I have is to ask people when and why did things get so partisan in America. And there's a myriad of reasons about that. But I think the reality is that we all know we need to get these things done. We want the government to work. We realize that President Obama is the president. Harry Reid is the majority leader. There are constituencies that have reelected them and somewhat given them a mission, just as John Boehner and Eric Cantor and all of us up here have constituencies that want to get things done. The primary question, though, I'll say, when everything's stripped away, I think most people in Washington want to do the right thing. Very difficult to get to it, but I've given you 4 examples in which we have taken steps to work together. So there's no reason to think now we're going to abandon that. We're just going to, we'll punch through this. We're America. We're the greatest country in the world, and I'm confident we're going to get the job done.
I've got a question for the Majority Leader, Aaron Haynes from the Associated Press. Thanks for coming down to see us. A couple of questions, actually. I'll just ask again, if you feel like the votes are there. Obviously, you've got a unanimous Georgia delegation, but are the votes there for this to actually happen? And you ask, who doesn't want a balanced budget? Is there any bipartisan support for this that you have seen and can speak to? And also, with all the other priorities between now and the end of this year, and with you having to vote on this one way or the other by the end of this year, what's the timeline for when this actually might come to a vote?
Sure. I do know of bipartisan support. Certainly, when the vote was taken back in '95, there was bipartisan support. And given the country's increasing awareness of our debt and deficit problem and what people are going through at home, I do think that there is a groundswell rolling across this country that will lend itself to members of Congress now trying to listen to their constituents and actually supporting this. So I'm optimistic about this. As far as timing concerned, we are expecting to have this vote sometime next month, sometime in November.
Could I say one thing? You know, a lot of times, the only way you will find out how your member of Congress really feels about something if you bring a vote up. They can talk at home and they can say everything is okay and they believe one way or the other. But you find out where their heart's at and what they truly believe when it comes time for votes. And we have not voted on this since 1995, and so I think the American people, if nothing else, deserve to know how their member of Congress or how their U.S. Senator feels about a balanced budget amendment. And that's what this vote will do, and that's the reason Speaker Boehner and Leader Cantor demanded in the deal that we get a vote on the balanced budget amendment, and so the American people can find out exactly where their elected officials in Washington stand on the balanced budget.
One more question.
May I say something too on that? Both questions about the balanced budget amendment as well as your question. I want to remind you the greatest political force in America is embodied in the first three words of the U.S. Constitution, we the people. In fact, former Senator Everett Dirksen one time said, when he feels the heat, he sees the light. And what he means by this is when his constituents contact him and said, Buster, you're heading in the wrong direction, heading in a different one. Most members of Congress, when they get enough of those calls, emails, etc., are going to start paying attention. And I think we can pass the balanced budget amendment of the Constitution. We just have to get the American people activated, and that's what I'm trying to do. And frankly, I think we're fixing to begin the process of getting this country back on the right course of constitutional and limited government. It's absolutely critical for the future of this nation. I've been very busy trying to light those grass fires all over this country. And that's the reason when I spoke, it's imperative that American people tell their congressmen, tell their senators, it's time to pass a balanced budget amendment. It's time to stop the outrageous spending in Washington. This administration wants to tax, borrow, spend, and then tax more. We've got to stop that. We've got to stop the outrageous spending, and the only way we're going to do that is with a balanced budget amendment of the Constitution, and the American people are all over this country are beginning to demand it. And when we get enough voices demanding all over this country, we'll pass the balanced budget amendment, and I hope we do that in November. And frankly, I hope our leadership will keep bringing it back if it doesn't pass, because it's absolutely critical for the future of this nation that we do so.
Dave Williams from Atlanta Business Chronicle, Leader Cantor. I think a lot of folks, particularly maybe Tea Party people, would say, okay, these automatic triggers are coming up. They may not be so bad. Are they dire enough cuts in being so draconian across the board that they're going to motivate both parties to come to the table with this super committee?
I think, yes, that the sequester is enough of a poison pill to ensure that we experience success in this Joint Select Committee. And remember, the Joint Select Committee's instruction is to increase the debt limit commensurate with the amount needed for the second tranche, which was remaining from when we did it in August. There's a lot of talk about what may or may not be possible over the next 2 months, but I do think the ability to achieve the $1.4 trillion in cuts and savings can be accomplished. And there's one reason why I think the sequester is such a poison pill, and that is the formula for sequestration applies cuts 50% to defense and 50% non-defense. And that's unacceptable to a lot of us who believe in a national security priority, because right now defense is about 17% of our budget. So what the effect would be is 17% of the budget, the Defense Department, would take 50% of the cuts. And I think most of us feel that's unacceptable.
Thank you.
One more question, please. The Secretary of State is about to set the date for the GOP primary in Georgia, and I'd like to hear Congressman Kingston and anybody else who wants to address this. What's your druthers? If you had your choice, where would you like to have the primary date? The RNC apparently would like to have it after early March in Georgia. What is your all position on that?
You know, that's a good question, of course, and I don't know that we, as G8, have talked about what our druthers would be in regard to go early or go late, and it really depends on the dynamics of of all these debates that are going on and who's wins what straw poll, and probably if it keeps going back and forth like that, it would be to Georgia's advantage to go late. If it narrows down to 2 or maybe 3 people, and certainly 2, I think there would be some advantage to going early. But I personally don't have an opinion on that. If any other of the members do, they may want to speak to it.
Thank y'all.